All right. Just wait for everything to go up. All right, looks like it goes live. So, hello everybody. Thanks for joining once again. Just let me know in the chat. Give me like a thumbs up or a thumbs down if something's going, if it's going well, if it's going wrong. That way I can fix it. Other than that, yeah, let's dive right in. So I've got a couple of things to kind of break down, whatever, tonight. And I'll get started with some of these first images. I'll do one or two, like this first one, for example. I'll definitely take a look at, and then add a few in this series. But they're all sort of based on something similar. So this third one I might look at as well, real quick, just to give you an idea of how everything sort of fits together. Cool. Well. Looks good. Sounds good. Great. It's good to hear. Thanks, guys. Let me grab that first file actually and just get started. Let's see. I've got them set up for the stream here and grab the first one. You might have noticed by my splash screen that I'm using Blender 2.82, so I'm using the alpha version. Some stuff, yeah. What was I going to say? I used one or two little things from the alpha version, but I'll show you that later in more detail. But I'm just using this one to make sure everything works. Now, if you have any questions, I'll sort of answer them in between whenever I have to wait, or in between different things. So the final file for this first one here, as you can see, it's just a plane that's been subdivided. Now, I'm going to set this a little bit smaller so that when we render it, we can actually see the full thing. And just to show you real quick, give it a sec, there we go. And these are fairly basic, to be completely honest. Now, they might look slightly different because of the alpha version, but it's not a big deal. But basically, this, in terms of a scene, this is not very complex. It's just a camera, a single light, and a piece of a plane, because actually I was going to show you this as well. All of these, I generally render them quite large, so you can zoom in on them and see all the different detail. And I like all those little bits in the render itself. And to actually get this rendered, even with, what is it, my 64 gigs of RAM, I needed to switch over to CPU to begin with, and really always just trim off all the fat, basically, and making sure that I don't actually have any excess geometry or whatever going on, so I can render it the highest possible subdivision and highest possible quality. And even then, if I open this up again, you'll see, if I zoom in, you'll see that it works, but you can still see sort of a little bit of sort of ripples and stuff in the geometry. But in this case, I kind of liked it, and I thought it fit quite well with the theme, so I left it in there, and it was fine. And I was just constrained by what I could render. But let's have a quick look at everything else in the scene. So like I said, just a plane. The only modifiers that I have on there is just a single subdivision modifier. Let me set up wireframe here so we can see what we're doing. So yeah, this has just got a single subdivision in the viewport, but doesn't really matter. It's set to adaptive, so I'm using micro displacement. So if you have a go look at the shader, you might be surprised at how simple it ends up being. This looks kind of complex, but honestly it really isn't that complex to begin with. This idea sort of first started from a different project that I was working on for a client, and then I took this shader and sort of just kind of explored it and had fun with it. So if we set this to rendered and turn off our overlays, we can kind of see what's going on as I'm pulling it apart. So really it comes down to two textures. The first one being a wave texture, and I'm just gonna disable the displacement for now and the subdivision, so this is a little bit faster to calculate. There we go. Is it set to, set it to GPU? There we go. It'll be just a bit quicker as well. So it's just a regular wave texture. I'm using UVs in this instance, and nothing really special about it. As you can see, it's wave texture with a bit of distortion and a bit of detail set. and the detail cranked to maximum. And yeah, outside of that, I'm really just throwing in the distortion and messing with the scale basically. Now the other part of this is a Musgrave texture, which can be kind of a pain in the butt to use, but I found a fun little trick with this map range that I'll get into. But basically, if I smash these two together, so what's happening is I've got the UV coordinates piped into this, what seems like a math node, but it's actually a vector math node. So this allows you to add or subtract or multiply or divide or whatever you've got in here, two different UV vectors together. And that will give you kind of a fun experiment. So the way to set it up correctly, let's have a look here, is this wave texture. What I do to it first before I just pipe it in is I'll subtract minus 0.5. And the reason for that is if you want your UVs, if you want that first texture, so this wave texture, to affect the Musgrave texture in sort of in a fashion where it goes in both ways instead of just pushing it one way, then subtracting 0.5 from it, because I know this texture goes from 0 to 1, and now it goes from 0.5 to minus 0.5. Now it's going to sort of push it either way, and you'll see that in a second when I start messing with it. Then this multiplier is really just how much the texture affects the other one. And let me just show you real quick what I mean. So I'm gonna turn off this subtract for a second, and we're looking at the Musgrave. So we're looking at the Musgrave with that vector sort of added in. If I just use the UV, this is what it normally looks like. And then with that extra vector from the wave texture added in, this is sort of what happens. So if I turn this down, for example, and let me set the performance here a little bit. Let's do 420 as usual for laughs. Then you'll actually be able to see what happens as I multiply this up or down. So if I just set this to 0, then we get the texture doing normal, just its normal UV thing. The moment we start multiplying in, we get that extra sort of movement and weirdness in it. Now if I turn that subtract on and off, what you'll see is that it actually pushes it sort of in both directions, and it feels a little more normal to use. Now for this one in particular, it doesn't make that huge of a difference. I mean, if you get the right look for it, then it's fine. There's still a driver on here, but don't mind that. That's actually a mistake. I'm gonna delete it because it doesn't really do anything because it's not an animation. And then once you have this texture, while it's nice, there's a lot of like darkness in it, and you wanna, if I were to pipe this in directly, we'll still get maybe a lot of flat areas, and it might not look perfectly okay. You get a lot of sort of really extreme values. And one of the fun things of Blender 2.81 is now that we've got this map range node. So what I noticed with the Musgrave texture, let me take out the displacement again real quick, is if you just look at it normally, there's actually sort of the problem with it is that the values go from under 0, so under black, to higher than black. And what the map range does, it allows you to sort of remap everything. So for example, I'm mapping values from at the bottom minus 0.2 to all the way at the top 0.5, and I'm kind of squishing them in between 1 and 0. So if I set this back to 0, for example, and I apologize for the noise coming from outside, but otherwise it gets super warm in here if I'm recording and rendering at the same time. You'll see that black sort of comes back, and those extreme values, it's really hard to figure out where they are. So by using the map range node, you can kind of clamp them, and by setting this to clamp as well, you actually just clamp it from 0 to 1. So the way this clamp works is, let's say if there would be a value lower than this, it would still be lower than 0, but clamping basically means that you're grabbing this as a bottom value, this is the top, and just clamping it at 0 and 1 maximum. And that 0 and 1 gives you more control, and visually it's a lot easier to manage because you'll know where the darker parts are and where the lighter parts are. So again, it's all about just making sure there's not an not a crazy amount of contrast in here. And then second step, for some reason, is black. I think I might have done something wrong here. Oh no, never mind. It is just that black. It's black and ever so slightly light gray as the diffuse color. But basically everything's coming from the and it looks a little bit different, obviously, but everything's basically coming from the roughness as well. So that same map I pipe into the roughness, and then I get to play around with these values, and then I use the displacement sort of for the main shape, the big rough shape, and then there's a bump map in there as well, which let's see if we turn that off, then all this, and obviously I'm not setting up the displacement, so let me turn that on real quick. Now we're going to get sort of the full effect. By piping this in the bump as well and setting that up fairly high, you can add in just a little bit of extra detail. I'm just going to make sure I can get close to it so I can show you. So if we just look at some of these crevices over here, for example, if I pull this out, then it'll be in there, but not really. So again, it's just all a case of adding in more, and that all together with just that one backlight coming in, it reflects everything, and you'll see this one light really does everything. So if I move this around, you'll see the sort of the rough and the shiny parts of it, and they sort of form the final image. And it's kind of cool. I mean, even if I hide this, it's kind of fun because I like to keep things simple, especially when I'm prototyping and messing around. And sometimes you just kind of get lucky, and like I said, with just one light and one plane and a fairly simple shader, you've already got a really compelling image, which is quite interesting. And as far as I know, compositing wise, yeah, I didn't really do much compositing to it. Let's see if this renders in not a crazy amount of time, then we should be able to use it. Let's give it a second here, see what happens. I'll look at some questions in the meantime. Thank you for all the love, you guys. Tired of those 1-minute tutorials, which everyone in the dog now. You know, it's a thing. It's always with tutorials. You've always got trends. It doesn't really. Did I participate in the November challenge? I did not. Unfortunately, I had a lot of work and some personal stuff going on, and I didn't have time to get down to it. Could I use a map node instead? I don't know exactly what you're trying to ask me, but use it with maybe do mapping. I mean, you can do math on the UVs and everything as well. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff. So what shortcut am I using to turn off on and off the nodes? M. Looks like already somebody answered that. It's fine. Sorry I'm late. Don't worry about it. It's all good. And right, cool. So here you can see the final image. Really the only thing I do to it, and I don't know how visible this will be, but basically I just sort of sharpen it up and then soften it. And you won't really be able to see much, it seems. I mean, I can see it a little bit, but man, on the stream, I doubt that'll be very visible. Basically, the reason I do this, because these images are really huge, like the one I showed you here, it's 7,200 by 9,000. So these are meant for print and sort of fairly large prints. And if there's a really razor sharp, it feels super CG. And if you have to resize a little bit, sometimes you have to upscale just a tiny bit. If it's ever so slightly blurred, it's very, it feels a lot more organic and less sort of CG, which is kind of nice. Cool. Let's see. Then this is the second one we'll have a look at. And here you can see the thing I was talking about a little bit more even. Again, this is a combo of the same thing. And I mean, these series are fun to do, and generally, I don't need to save this, it's fine. I believe this is number 3. There we go. Generally, a lot of these series, I sort of have one cool idea, and then I see how much further I could push it. So with this one, rather than just having a flat plane, I figured I would do some other stuff to it. And let's start at the beginning. So this one, really, all I did was just kind of go into sculpt mode, and I didn't really subdivide it or anything. It just sort of pushed vertices around, and let's see what we're using here. So I would just sort of push stuff around, and this looks kind of weird because there's already all kinds of things happening to it. And then for the final thing, again, I took away all the sort of unnecessary bits around the camera and just added some displacement and other things on top. And actually I've got the wrong one selected, so there we go. Here you can see that's it really without anything else. So it's just fooling around and kind of pushing it around and seeing how that goes. And honestly, most of the time you'll see the compositing is the same as well, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. You'll see the shader looks the same because basically it is the same. The thing I like to do, especially with these kinds of projects, let's see if I set this to GPU, I can sort of look at it real quick. Yeah, this isn't going to look perfect, but it's fine. The thing that I tend to do is once I get a nice looking shader or whatever, all I can do is just mess around with the mapping coordinates, and I tend to sort of hunt for a good one. So you can see it moving around here as I'm just messing with it. And you know, sometimes I sit here for maybe 10, sometimes 20 minutes, just kind of going through the coordinates and seeing one that matches really nice. So if I turn these back on, just that little bit of extra sort of bumpiness and overhang of geometry gives it that little bit extra. And it doesn't look perfect, this preview render, because I have some other stuff going on in the background. But you get the idea, basically. The preview is quite low res, so that's why you get this really scratchy and weird geometry. But if we go back, yeah, if we look close, it's still doing that, but just because of the sheer size of it, you basically get these nice flowing lines and interesting looking things. Now I will say I definitely pushed my machine with rendering these really, really large. Like I said, I had to render them on CPU to be able to use system RAM. Now if you're just going to render them, what is it, at like normal-ish resolutions, let's say 50% here, then you could bring down the dicing rate, for example, and let's see if I can get a sharp one out of this, and I'll answer some more questions in the meantime. So, hey to everybody showing up as well. Will you be showing any of the cool abstract human head portrait stuff that you do? Not tonight, but there's other streams on my channel, other archives where I explain some of them. So I would advise going to look at those, and yeah, you'll get a lot more from those. Unfortunately, I don't have that much time, and I tend to ramble on a little bit, and the second part of the other ones that I'm going to show take a little bit longer than this. So I don't think there's enough time for that tonight. Hey, could I ask you how you got into streaming, as I would like to start, don't know where to start. I started making tutorials, and then because I didn't always have time to edit everything, I started streaming because it's a little bit easier, because this takes me, I don't know, 15 minutes to set up. I just copy over the files that I was using before, copy them in a separate file so that I can't mess them up during the stream, and then just talk about what I did. The one thing I would recommend getting into is, if you have the money, looking at a USB audio interface and then a good microphone to go with it, or a good USB microphone, either one or the other. It really does make a difference. But yeah, OBS, Open Broadcaster Service, or whatever it's called. I'll show it to you real quick. That's the UI. It's very simple. It's free as well, so you can start with that. And it's really easy to set up and use. And you know, before you hit go live on YouTube, you can mess around with it a little bit. Yeah. Is it practical to animate images like this, or does it become difficult to see what your final result will be with so much geometry? Well, actually, it's only this much geometry because I'm rendering them at huge sizes. It is quite practical to actually render this. For example, you could animate one of these map parameters, and this might just show a little bit. Yeah, this takes a little while every time, but basically, if you animate your mapping parameters, then it could move around, and it'll be pretty cool. Like, you get some really interesting effects once you start animating them. You could also split up the mapping for the Musgrave and the wave texture, for example, and animate those separately. And then you've got two textures maybe moving in opposite direction, sort of smashing into each other and creating weird patterns. a lot of the animation would happen at shader level rather than at object level. That being said, you can even, you know, displace the plane and have it moving around while you have a shader moving onto it. So it's, yeah, the possibilities are endless, honestly. You can have a really good time experimenting with it and doing some cool stuff with it. So I think that concludes it for these two. Like I said, I think one of them, I think I've posted the files for one of them somewhere on Instagram, but if you want to grab them or just ask me for them, I'm happy to send the blend file if you want to look at it in detail. So let's have a look at the next images here. So let's start with, I think this one is one of the first ones. So this is the series that I just sort of wrapped up posting today, I think. Was it yesterday or today? I can't even remember when I posted the last one. And again, these are meant for printers, so they're absolutely massive, and you can see the amount of crazy detail in it. And that was really just the goal with these. I wanted to see, I had this idea, an idea for how to put this together, and I wanted to see if it was possible to do it in Blender and see if I could get this crazy amount of detail. Now would be the time to start asking questions, because a lot of these are extremely slow to open. So I'll have time to answer questions in a little bit. First off, though, I'll show you how I actually model this stuff and how to I guess automate it so it doesn't take you too much time. But yeah, as you can see, every single one of these is just absolutely gigantic. And I don't know which ones. I think I might grab this one and maybe one of these ones or this one. We'll see how much time I'll have left, but I'm going to go into how I modeled it first and some cool stuff. So let's grab the development version. There we go. And let's say I just want to do a grid of these, and I'm going to keep it, I'm not going to go to in as much detail because everything's going to slow down, but the idea is the same. You just iterate it a couple more times. So let's scale this up 5 times. So now I know this grid is 10 by 10, and I'm going to subdivide it into, let's say, 9 times. So I've got 10 by 10. Actually, no, let's do it differently. Let's do 5 by 5, then it won't be too slow. I'm going to turn on my wireframes for this one so you can see what's going on exactly. Now, the idea behind this is I'm going to switch to faces mode. Basically, what I do is, yeah, so Control E for the edge menu. I edge split all of these. So now they're just individual polygons. And now what I can do is if I deselect everything, I can randomly select, let's say, 25%, and subdivide them. Then I'm going to do that same thing, randomly select and subdivide them. Now, the problem is, the reason I edge split them the first time, as you can see, if you do that again without edge splitting, you get these weird extra lines, and that's not what I want. So again, select everything, edge split first. So now they're all loose again, and then go back to select random and subdivide. And then if I do the same thing, don't forget to edge split, and select random and subdivide again, and you're already starting to see sort of the pattern how I did it. Now, I don't want to be doing this the whole time. It's really boring. There's other parts that I still do manually, but this is sort of where basic Python stuff comes in, and you really don't have to be scared of this stuff because it's super easy to use. And I'll show you real quick how I build it up and then the final script and where to grab it as well if you want to use it yourself. So I'm just going to go back a little bit until I have that very first one here. There we go. And if you turn on the info node down here, you'll see that everything that I do, for example, I go into edit mode, I select everything, and let's say I would subdivide, all these actions, they show up separately. And this is exactly what you need in the Python code to make it work. So to create a very simple Python script, the first thing you need to do is always put in import BPY, and that basically means you can see the way everything starts with BPY here. Can I zoom in a little bit? I cannot. I was hoping I could, but it is what it is. Every one of these commands starts with BPY. So in Python, basically you load in modules and they contain different commands, and you can use those to drive different what they call operators in Blender. So every action you do in Blender is called an operator. And you can see here, BPY, that means Blender Python.ops, that means operators. And then you're operating on a mesh because we're in edit mode. And then, for example, you've got subdivide or select all, and the action is deselect or select. So let's say what I want to do is I want to select everything. Actually, I want to edge split first. So I'm going to do this, copy, Control-C, edge split. Then I want to subdivide all of these, or actually let's do it the right way. I want to deselect everything. So first I'm going to select everything, then I'm going to edge split, then I'm going to deselect everything. And there are more, what's the best way, more efficient ways of doing this in Python, but this is just to show you how you can build up a simple script really quick. So then what I want to do is I want to select random, and we can grab that as well. And if I change the percentage, you can see now I get all the parameters for the percentage. So if I copy that and paste it here, now I can set it to, let's say, 25%. And the seed we can set to 5, but we can change it later. You'll see in the final script there's some randomness going on there. I don't want to subdivide, so I'm going to copy that subdivide. And then basically I want to select everything again, which I've already done, which I already copied. And then I want to, actually I don't need to do that because this is going to run. And then at the very start, it's going to select everything, edge split it, and then deselect. So if I want to do this, if I just run this once now, I'm in edit mode. So let's see, with everything selected, if I go to text, yes, run script, so Alt P, and you'll see it did exactly those actions. So it deselected everything, or selected everything, edge split them, deselected them, selected random, and then subdivided them. And this is super cool because you don't really need to know how to code. You just need to know to put this at the top so you can use all these BPY dot whatever things, and this works in edit mode. Then I could run this again. I could run this however many times I want, but you see now we start running into some issues because I keep having the same one selected. So what I want to do is, and if you're new to programming, I want to loop this a couple of times. I don't want to hit Alt P every single time. So the way this works in Python is, let's say for I in range 1 or 5, so let's see, I want to loop this 5 times. So I is just this little thing in program that you tend to use. So for every step in a range of 5, so when you do 5 steps, I want you to repeat all of these. Now, one thing that's really important is that once you have something which is called a loop, so this is going to loop 5 times through the code that I've got selected, you need to indent it, and that also keeps your code really clean, and it makes sure that it works. If I run this now, you'll see it did that 5 times, and I don't have to worry about it. I've already set it up. Now, one thing I need to do, oh, I'm undoing my text. That's not what I want to do. Can I undo the script? No, that's fine. No worries. Indent this again so it's correct. Another thing I want to do is, you can see how it's subdivided all in the same places. And that's down to the fact that the seed stays the same. So what we want to do is every time this loop runs, we kind of want to randomly pick a seed. And that's where we get back into the import stuff. Like I said before, Python has many modules, and some basic math stuff works, but random, for example, comes from the random module. So I'm going to import random, and all of this stuff you can find online. For example, in the help, you've got the Python API reference. Oh, and that will open up a web browser with all of the stuff that's in here. So bpy.ops, the thing I was talking about, it'll explain to you what it does, and you don't have to be too scared of it because it's fun. It's, you know, you can sort of see live what they're doing on one side here, and you can copy and paste them. And once you get the hang of it, you can start looking at more advanced ones, which is really nice. So this seed, and I know this because I've used this a couple times from random. So I've got this library loaded, and I want to import rand int, and basically what that does is it means random integer, and it will, if you call that, if you type in rand int, let's see, 0 to 5, it will give you a random number between 0 and 5, which is really nice. That means for this seed, rather than 5, I can type that, so rand int, and let's say from 0 to 9,999, so we've got 10,000 ways for it to subdivide, or ways for it to select rather and subdivide. If I now run the same code, there's a problem. I'm not in, I was in an edit mode, so normally I'll put in stuff for edit mode and everything. So now I'm in edit mode. If I run it, now it's randomly selected parts, and you get an even more intricate pattern. And you could run this like a million times, and then it gets really fun. So for the simpler versions of that image, and I'm going to stick to a range of 4 just so things don't slow down too much. You'll see in a little bit why I do that. So subdivide it, let's say, is it 5 times? No. This is interesting. I just want to subdivide it. There you go. We'll keep it simple, won't go overboard. And what I did then was I created an array of these. So let's see, I'm gonna grab 1 unit going upwards, and you'll see why that's important in a minute. Let's say I'll do an array of 6 in total. All I'm gonna do is apply, go in here, run the script, and now I have just an array of all of these. Now you might be thinking, okay, so we're already kind of getting the shape, but we're not really there yet, because my intention is I'm just going to create not a plane but a cube. So I'm going to focus on this. It's a regular cube. I know a standard cube is 2 units by 2 units, so I'm going to scale that down to 0.5. And now this is 1 by 1 by 1. I'm going to apply by hitting Control A all the transforms. So now it's scale 1, dimensions 1 by 1 by 1. The reason I do this is I want to make sure if I parent this now to this main object. So see over here, my cube is now parented to my plane. If we go into the object info of the plane, or the object properties rather, we can turn on instancing and set it on the faces. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to turn off the instancer. I'm going to scale by face size. Now, what that means is, because I know my cube is 1 by 1 by 1, it's actually going to scale quite well to the size of the faces in here. Now, it's not perfect, so we can just scale it down until it makes sense. And you can see it kind of works, but not really, because we've got bigger and smaller cubes, and they're kind of doing their job, but they're also not really doing their job. So the other part of setting this up correctly, let me grab the plane here and turn that off, is I need to fill up every cube right. So the big ones, I know they're just going to be 1 meter in height, and I sort of messed up because what I need to do is actually make this cube 2 by 2 wide and only 1 high to match the size of the original one. So that's what I'm going to do. 2 by 2. And I'm going to apply all transforms, and it'll work out in a minute. So for the final ones, I actually made sure that all of my polygons were 1 meter by 1 meter, and there was 1 meter or 1 unit, whatever you want to call it, between them, just so the math is a lot easier. Now, the only other part of this, really, or main part of modeling the space shape for the instances, is I know these are sort of at the right height from each other, the big, really big ones, but these ones, technically, they should have one in between. So if I just select one, you can hit Control G, or go up here and select similar, or Shift G rather, my bad, and select all the ones with the same area. Now I just set this threshold to 0 to make sure I have all the ones from the same area. And now this is where I said where that height comes in. I knew there's 1 unit between each one, so I'm going to duplicate those on the Z-axis and add half a unit. So what I can do then is, let's see, these are the next size over. Again, no, not material, but grab them at the same area. Duplicate on the z-axis, but 0.25, and I'm going to repeat that 3 times. So now we start layering and layering and layering. And this is why I didn't want to get into too many iterations over here, because it's a mess otherwise. So 0.25, so duplicate Z, 0.125 we're at now, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because we duplicated it once, that made 2 layers, but we want 8 in total, which is why I added another 6. And then for the final one, grab them in the same area. And this gets pretty slow if you do a lot of iterations. So I'm at duplicate on the z-axis, 0.125 divided by 2, because I don't want to do the math in my head. But it's not working because, let's see, what is it in the preferences? I think I might not have set this up. Support. Oh, I always forget where it is. I think it's this one that I need to put in. So let's see. Have anything selected? No. So do the same thing. Let's grab the smallest ones. Shift G, area, and then duplicate Z 0.125 divided by 2. And now it gives me the right value. And if I go into the front view now, I know because of this one unit, the last one is going to have to be up here. So I can just hit, dang it, messed it up again. So duplicate the Z axis, 0.125 divided by 2. There we go. And now I can hit Shift R to repeat that last action. And now we've got it set up. Now if we turn on the faces instancing, I'm going to have to mess with this a little bit, but now we get this perfect sort of grid and it works the way it should. Kind of. There's something in here that I've messed up along the way, but you get the idea. This works as it should now. And that's why I was saying earlier I had 1 by 1 by 1, because it's a lot easier to calculate. And now we're dealing with half heights and double widths, and this is a pain in the butt. But this is sort of how it works out. Now, shading wise, and you can see all of this from that simple script. So let's go in, and I'm going to not save this one. And I'll load in the final script so you can see what the difference is and how it's a little bit more advanced, and just run through it. Data, portfolio, scripts, Megagrid. Now this isn't a full add-on yet, so it's just a script. It's just if I ever have some time at some point. Let's see, and I think I started with something like this. Now this one, you'll see there's a little bit more in there, but the same idea applies. Now this one is meant to run in object mode, so it opens up and then does all of these things. It does the select random twice, and that's the only major difference. So if I set this to 4 again to keep it fairly quick, or actually just to set it to 6, I'm not going to do the instancing on this one. Then if I hit Alt P, there you go, and now you get this super duper fun pattern to work with. And really that's the gist of it. If you want to grab this, let's see, I threw this on GitHub earlier. You can play around with it. It's very basic version. If I ever have time, I'll throw more in here. So it's github.com and then Mantissa with a little hyphen at the end. And then under repositories, you'll find it under Megagrid. And there it is. It's the same script, so same thing that over here. You can mess with it. You might get some errors if you're not in object mode. I can, like I said, if I ever have time, I'll clean it up. But some of these, because they're very simple scripts, and I kind of mess around with them, I don't always have time to finish them perfectly. And yeah, I want to share them anyway because it's fun to play with. But yeah, this is one of the reasons why Python shouldn't scare you, because it allows you, it opens up automation, if anything. you know, you don't have to build an add-on the very first time. You can just build a very simple script with a couple of lines just to automate something, and it can give you amazing results right at that. So let's actually get into it and open one of these. These are going to be really slow, so I'm going to answer a bunch of questions. So if you have any questions, now would be the time to ask. This is the first one, and there we go. It's opening, but it's going to take forever. So let's see. Is there a way to use Manuel Bastoni Lab in Blender 2.8? Yes, there's a 2.8 version also on GitHub. So github.com, and is it in here? Oh. It's called MB Lab now, just MB-Lab, and then if you Google, or in my case, Ducket. Oh, there's a website and everything. Nice. I didn't see there was already a website. So it's, yeah, you can grab it from GitHub and you can still use it, which is really nice. And they keep working on it and doing cool stuff to it. So it's really coming along nicely. Just want to say thanks for providing free blend files and models. Being new to Blender, I feel like they're going to help me a lot with playing around and learning. Well, I'm glad they're useful. There we go. I think I already answered Derek's question from earlier. Yeah, so basic setup process and what I'm doing to iterate. So yeah, I'm just messing around with the coordinates, the vector coordinates from the previous one to push it. Maybe not so much of a question, but I've really been wanting to add this extreme detail into my renders, and watching you, I know that serious material magic is needed. Yeah, I'll get into the materials in a little bit. Mainly just wondering efficient ways to add this type of detail. So for this series, I guess, I did the same thing in two different ways. One of them is way more efficient than the other, and you'll see the advantages and disadvantages of each, basically. Workflow like magic? I don't know. I just spent a lot of time noodling with this stuff. I wouldn't necessarily call it magic. I get lucky a lot as well. This is my first time. My favorite Python in Blender might have gone down by even a little. Yeah, there's really not much you can do wrong with it. Open that info box and just copy and paste commands, and you'll see it's not that hard. It's a lot of fun. So, is there a way to limit the smallest of faces? Like if you have a face divided by more than 10 times, it's too much. There's probably a way to do it. This is where my knowledge of Python sort of, plateaus a little bit, is the best way to describe it, I would think. You could probably, calculate the size of the faces that are selected and deselect the ones that are too small. I'm sure there's a way to do it. And somebody that's good with Python might be pulling their hair out and be telling me like, oh, there's a really easy way to do it. Shouting at their screen right now. So, very glad to see you again. Well, very glad to see you again. Please keep the stream public on this. So, yeah, all my streams are immediately archived on the channel afterwards. You can revisit them whenever you want. What operating system do you use? I use Linux. Specifically, I use Ubuntu. So, in case you were wondering. This is the one I use. It's quite, I was on another one before, but I came back to this because it's got a lot of stuff that plugs into it quite nicely. And it's really lightweight. The fact that everything looks dark gray is down to a theme that's on my GitHub as well, that you can grab from there and install. So, what is my ideal freelance project / client Mantissa relationship? It really depends on the project. Yeah, so navigating this, you'll see, is pretty slow, and I'll get to it further in just a second. That's a hard question. The thing is, projects can start really great and then, you know, end up being a slog because of bad communication or because you both kind of messed up or whatever. And this is actually the wrong one, so I'm going to open the right one instead. And you can see Blender really slows down with the amount of stuff that's in here. So let's grab this. It's hard to say. Usually it's easier for me when people just kind of give me a direction and they let me kind of go off and do my own thing. So for example, I do quite a bit of work for the music industry nowadays, and they generally approach me because they've seen something on Instagram and that they like, and they kind of ask me to do something similar or in my style. Sometimes I say, which is weird because I wouldn't really be able to tell you what my style is exactly. And that's fun because you get to kind of explore, and especially musicians, for example, are really fun people to work with because they're also creative, so they understand that you're putting a lot of yourself into this, and they usually have very minimal feedback compared to more corporate or business-focused clients. But that's fun too because, you know, they're all about just getting cool visuals out there, and you know, they usually have the budget to pay for it, and it's fast and it's a fast turnaround, and if they communicate well, it's fun. So dream jobs is where you can work with somebody that's really on the same level, but they don't come around very often. They do, and it's nice, and you got to enjoy them. I'm not saying everything else is bad, but I'm kind of rambling on at the moment. But I don't know. I like it when people are just themselves with me, that we try to keep, you know, we agree on the business side, on a budget, whatever, and then, you know, we try to act normally and not too formally, because that generally gets in the way of being creative and kind of interacting with each other. You know, it's got to be fun as well for both sides. And I've had moments where being a clients maybe weren't very compatible, and then it's very good to just be able to see that from the start, say, look, maybe I can refer you on to somebody else that might work more in a way that you like to work, because I don't think we might be a good fit. And there's more power to you because you'll attract the people that are similar to you rather than the ones that you maybe don't like working with. So yeah, I don't know. Also, could you tell us about your PC setup, graphics cards, etc.? The easiest way to do this is just to go to my preferences, and here you'll see I've got 4 graphics cards and a 16-core Threadripper first gen, 64 gigs of RAM. I built this machine about 2 years ago now, and it's still going strong, and I'm really happy with it. A lot of people might think that I'm super rich or whatever. I really didn't. I worked towards this, and when I came into some money and I got lucky with some financial stuff that fit together, I bought this machine and I invested in it knowing that I'm going to use it for at least 2 or 3 years. And it has really pushed everything. I render all of my jobs, everything, just on one computer. And it makes all the difference for me because I can just work super, super fast. And I usually work on a local disk, which is super fast, and then it syncs it in the background to the network as a backup should anything go wrong. And it just allows me to work almost at the speed of thought, which is really cool. And then, you start doing this stuff and everything starts slowing down as you progress more and your skills get a little bit better and you want more detail, and you start doing these huge renders for no other reason than because you want them to be huge and all that stuff. So Sky says, hey Sky, I'm really inspirational. Wow. I'm always happy when people say that, but I don't really know usually how to respond to that because I'm just a guy, But thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Since when I've been using Blender, I don't know, it's 5 or 6 years now, but I was doing, I don't know, maybe 5-ish. And I was doing about 5 years of CG before that professionally with 3ds Max. So 10 years professionally, CG roughly, and then I don't know, maybe another 5 or 10 very on and off screwing around with it, but not in the slightest like full time or anything. So all right, let's continue this because I want to get through these, and we're already an hour in and I could waffle on about other stuff all day. So this is sort of one of those finished ones, and there's actually an extra little bit towards the workflow. So I'm going to turn this off and you'll see everything is just nice and slow because we're dealing with 5 million faces. And this is where things get interesting. So you get the same structure that I had earlier. The only thing I'm doing now is this trick I keep using because it's really fun, of basically piping a texture into a vertex weight. So this most likely will be extremely slow, but it's the best way to illustrate it. So even going into like weight paint mode or edit mode or whatever, it just takes forever. So come on. Here I am trying to explain stuff. I guess I'll just answer a few more questions. So your ArtStation, impressive, all Blender. I think pretty much everything on ArtStation is Blender, yeah. So here you see, yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure. Most of my social media stuff I started posting after I'd started using Blender. So normally everything on there is Blender, unless it's otherwise stated. I think you can see it even in the thing. I always fill it in. So basically what I'm doing here, I have a vertex weight edit modifier, and I set it to an empty group, and you'll see this group is completely empty. There's no weights in it. That's why it's blue. And then just by toggling on group add, group remove, and setting it to custom curve like this, and then throwing in a texture mask, basically I'm using a texture now to create a vertex group. And with that vertex group selected, I can now go back out in object mode. Now I can use this with a mask modifier. And what it'll do is it allows me to procedurally take out different parts of the mesh. So for example, this mask over here, so I'll just show you real quick after this finishes calculating. Come on, Blender, you can do it. And this is without the instances turned on. With the instances, it's like crazy slow. There we go. Give it a second to load in all the data. There we go. Remove it again. And basically turning on this mask, you'll see it brings out all the gaps, and they basically correspond to the vertex group that I made. So I create the empty one here first, mask, and then I pipe it into here. And this texture mask is in our textures down here. It's just a cell noise and a cell noise and a distorted noise. So that gives you a nice blocky texture, and that takes out sort of chunks in kind of a funky grid. And it's cool, it's fun. It just gives it that little bit extra. And then the final move, and this is going to be super slow, is a cube. Once again, I'm just going to show you real quick. But the thing with the cube here, and will I be able to show it? No, I'll just go into material preview, is it's got, let's see, a solidify on it. So within that cube, there's a smaller cube, and I can, and so it gives it just a little bit extra. So now it's a second mesh island in there. And yeah, it's just something to mess with. And then finally I'll add a bevel, but I don't turn this on in the viewport because it makes it even worse when I enable the instances. So let's go back to solid mode, and you'll see when I enable this, again, if I hit it faces here, then you'll see everything just completely takes forever. There we go. It wasn't too bad. I was expecting worse, but for example, when I try to move the viewport, you'll see I tried to move it twice now. It takes quite a long time. So generally, I just turn off the instancing while I'm working on it, and then do the shading separate. So let's have a look at the shading of the cube, because the instancer is turned off. So all those little planes, that array of planes, it doesn't render at all. And what I'm doing is using the cube for shading. Now, turning this back off, let's have a look at the cube. And I'm going to set it to, actually I'm going to set this to rendered rather than material preview. And I just want to isolate the cube here. Actually, I want to isolate the cube and the light so we can see what we're doing. And, all right, and cube, so we have something to look at. Doesn't really show me any lights. Okay, whatever. So again, the compositing, same as the other things, just a little bit of sharpening and then a soften, just to get it feeling a little bit more like it was shot with a camera rather than rendered from Blender. And this one, again, seems overly complex, but what I'm going to do here is actually duplicate it a couple of times to show you how this works. And I'm just going to set it to material preview instead. And you might already start noticing some differences. So first thing I'm doing is, remember that wave texture from earlier that was smashed into a Musgrave texture? Now it's just a Musgrave texture smashed into a Musgrave texture. So it's nothing special, same deal as before, only I'd like to be able to preview it, and yet it is not previewing because I'm in the wrong slot. So there we go. I think this one now shows it. There you go. So same as before, these two textures are being smashed together. Now to avoid having them all look exactly the same, let's see. Mute this one. Now technically they should be the same. Where are we? If I just pipe that into here, they still aren't. Come on. So what else is going on? Anyway, the way this works, I'll just explain it. It's probably easier. So the way this works is in the object info node, you've got a random node, and if I just preview this, this basically assigns every single one of those instances a color from black to white, a random one. So that means you can use this in various ways. And for example, I multiply it here and I multiply the UVs by it, which means that if you look at these Musgrave textures in the end, every single one will have a unique coordinate sort of pushed out somewhere. So they won't all look the same. And that, again, I use this black and white, which I then pipe into a whole bunch of things. So for example, this is the diffuse, excuse me. So this goes from 4 to 9, just to give it a little bit of different brightnesses. This controls the metallic. So some of them will actually be metallic and others won't. The rest of them will be have transmission at 1, so they'll be refractive. So you can actually, they're like glass, you'll be able to look through them. Then for the roughness, I grab the same sort of idea and just I'll give them the different roughness. And then that Musgrave texture, really all it was being used for was a bump map. So if you look at these now separately, some of them are actually a little bit darker. They all have a unique texture. Some of them are a bit more shiny than others. As you can see, there's different roughnesses for each one. And because these are all procedural textures, it doesn't matter how large you render them, you can get up super close and you get like sort of a similar feel to those earlier renders with the displacement. But that way I get nice and different ones. Now, unfortunately, let me turn on my, if I switch to Eevee real quick here and I turn on refraction, turn it on and turn refraction on here as well. Just gonna have to recompute the shaders. Still not working properly. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Basically, because I'm using cycles, it's not a big deal. I just can't preview them properly in Eevee, unfortunately. But here you'll see some of them are actually, if I make a light, just grab a point light, move it up, make it a lot brighter. It's helping, but not really. Can't even see where it is, to be honest. So yeah, some of them here you'll see this one's metallic, but then the one next to it has that transmission. And because I have a second set of cubes in here, you immediately get a lot of detail in the instances themselves. And now the cool thing about Blender and instancing is the instancing is pretty good. So I'm gonna grab all of this stuff and throw it out because I just need the one. And you'll see if I go in here, because my camera that I'm using, rather than using a, if I grab it over here, rather than using a perspective camera, which will give me lines that aren't 100% straight, you'll see I'm coming at it from a weird angle, so we've got sort of weird diagonal lines. By using an orthographic camera, I get nice straight lines and you get that sort of infinite grid feeling. Really helps as well. You could even throw a depth of field on here if you wanted to. So if I just render this, for example, it's just the planes without the instancing. You can see even those planes by itself make a really interesting sort of render, and you could do stuff with that as well. And let's say, actually, I want to focus over here somewhere. You'll see you could even add in some depth of field if you want it to make it look like really microscopic or whatever. Yeah, you could really overdo it easily. So there you go. And I was playing with that as well in the beginning, but I just wanted this feeling of like massiveness and this big towering structure. And without the depth of field, it works better. But we can render it with, just for shits and giggles. And I won't render it too high a thing, and make sure I'm not rendering at a crazy resolution. But that gives me a chance to show the lighting, which is very basic. But with these renders, you'll see a lot of lighting from the top, and that beveling on the cube kind of, and I'll show you the image again, actually. So the beveling on the cube has a very specific purpose, because it allows you to catch the light on all of these edges, which means you get all of this extra information for free. And knowing the way the scene looks, you can see one light coming in from the left, one light coming in from the right, and one light coming in from the top. And if you look at the later ones, actually kept it even more stark, where there's one light coming from the top. And that's the reason why, if we look at the sides here, you'll see only the top bevels are catching light, and it gives it an even more sort of giant, huge, stately feeling, which is a lot of fun. And you can mess around with it quite a bit. And it just adds a little bit more detail between the gaps. And even when you zoom in, you get all this beautiful detail. So that's the fun thing about making these really big renders for print. It's cool because if you ever see these printed, you'll be able to kind of go up close and notice there's a whole extra level of detail in there. So let's see if I can render this in the meantime and answer some more questions. I'm going to turn on my instances. It's going to take a little while. And I'm going to hit the render button. And then talk about the questions. So this will take a little bit to set up. All right. Hello there. I was looking at the alien spaceship from the movie Ender's Game. Can you share your thoughts on how that can be done, or something similar? Oof. I don't know what that looks like off the top of my head. So Ender's Game is space. I guess the movie, right? I don't know if that's it. Formic Mothership. Okay. Yeah, this, I'm sure there's many different ways to approach it to get that feeling. I think sculpting would probably be a lot easier than trying to do it in a different way, just because it gives you more, it's easier to do organic stuff when you're sculpting. I think this is what we're looking for as well. Yeah, it's hard to see, and I don't want to like get copyright striked or some crap like that. But yeah, that stuff I would think, yeah, sculpt it, and then most likely something like Houdini or a different good visual effects setup to get it to like split up and stuff. Yeah, you could probably like sculpt the base mesh, and then if you want the ships to kind of be part of the outside, then you could instance ships all over and then use similar shading techniques to give them all a different sort of result. So this is the same thing with depth of field. I'm just going to finish up questions before I move on to the next one. Specs, so I talked about that earlier, very brief. Threadripper 16 core, first generation, 4 GPUs and 64 gigs of RAM. I built it 2 years ago, but yeah, I said this earlier in the stream. I just looked up your Instagram, wanted to ask you, how do you come up with such ideas? I don't know, I just screw around until I find stuff. I wish there was this like magic thing I could tell you, but I have a lot of moments where I don't really get anything done. I try stuff and it doesn't work out, but I know a lot of people tend to like start a project and then go from start to finish and work on it for a long time. I'm not like that personally. I just kind of get bored. Unless I'm working on a longer project for a client or whatever, then obviously I have to. But for my own stuff, I like to figure out a cool technique and then sort of explore it for a week or so and make a couple renders and then kind of move on to the next thing. And usually I just try stuff. I just, oh, here's a modifier I haven't really used yet. Let's see what that does, that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm not trying to minimize it, but there's a lot of just experimentation. Most of my work on Instagram is my personal work, unless I'm doing something really specific, which you probably will see. Most of it, I have no idea what I'm going to make going in. I just kind of experiment until I find something that looks cool and go from there. So, so everybody's saying I showed my specs. Hey, I noticed you aren't using the denoise node in compositing. Any particular reason for that? Well, if I'm rendering stuff this big, then I don't need to, and I can leave it run overnight with a bunch of samples if I need to, so that's not big a deal. If I'm doing animations, I've started to use it quite a bit. Like recently I did a job for someone where I needed to do 24 animated sequences, 24 VJ loops in like a few weeks time. And they're all at 4K, so I just denoised them and used that as the final output, and they work quite well. But for stills, I don't know, there's something about having a little bit of noise in it and then sharpening and softening it that it gives me the feeling that it was somehow shot with a DSLR on film or something like that. Just give it some graininess. Things don't have to be perfectly not noisy. So yeah, here's some other ones. Maybe that's interesting to show as well before I move on. These, for example, these first ones. So this is the very first one I did in the series, but I didn't post it because I wasn't really knowing where I was going. So you can see this idea is a lot more rough. Some of the structures, it's very chaotic and it's cool. And this is where I found like it was fun to look at up close, but it didn't really give me a good idea of something that was formed. And I tried one with color as well, and this is sort of at a 45-degree angle looking at the things, so you get a lot of different extra edges, and again, fun but chaotic. And then this one is an isometric, but here's where I started feeling like I could put in a bit more of an overall shape, and I started like trying to shoot it from the angle, and I say shoot it, but like frame it from an angle so you get sort of stuff moving in both ways. And yeah, and then this is like the fourth one I did, and this one started where it all started to come together. And then I did one more in between, which is a bit more like the earlier ones, which gave me an idea of lighting, because you can see this one is still fairly evenly lit. The idea for the sort of the overhead lighting and the more moody one came from this one, which again is one at 45 degrees, sort of looking on, but I just had one light at the top, and it had this really nice sort of cascading gradient throughout the thing. And then that's where I sort of found the combo of different things, and I was able to put them together for the final 4 images. And technically, if I would go in, these ones, this one doesn't 100% fit with these other ones. You can see the feeling of these as sort of in the zone, and they all feel somewhat similar. But I like this one enough because this is the first one I felt like it was really, really kind of going in the right direction, while this one is still a bit too dissimilar. And yeah, I don't know. It's a feeling rather than really premeditated. So yeah. Anyway. So for the other one, one of the other ones I wanted to show you, basically, if we go back really quick, is that still opened up? Yeah. This one, it's just the same thing, but planes, sort of, they have a hole in the middle, and then it's just different ones, and they just get wider and wider towards the end. So it's just sort of a stair-stepping. I want to open it, but it's all going to take really long, and I don't know. So let's see. So that's 8. But it's based on exactly the same technique. So you'll see like my mouse is jumping all over the place. It doesn't really know what to do because it's so slow. I don't need to save this. Even the UI is like really slow and odd. I think I'm really pushing it here, but that's okay. As long as it works. Doesn't matter. And I always have all of everything enabled, unfortunately, because to render it, I'll render it from a batch, in a batch when I have multiple ones. Sometimes I'll do 2 or 3 of these in a night once I get up to speed. Like the first one might take 1 or 2 nights to really figure out, and then experiment with it. And once I get in a flow, Yeah, so let's turn this off. God, it takes forever. I'm gonna have a drink in the meantime. All right, there we go. And if I turn on everything, you'll see it's basically just same idea, but with different planes. So you kind of step down each level. So you can mess around with this, and you can use different base shapes and then iterate on those and have fun stuff. And this one has just one light, no, two lights, so one from the top. And the reason it's sort of not in the middle over the top is if we look at the actual image, because we're coming at it from a certain angle, the reflection of the light is sort of bouncing upwards. So if you move the light backwards, you can still light it in the middle and sort of get that center framing going, which is fun. So that's really cool. It's an interesting technique, but as you can see, this object is what, 2 million faces. So it's not for the faint of heart. It definitely takes a bit of experimentation. So the last one I want to show you actually is, so let me go back to the images so I know how to open the right one. Actually, I'll show you the final one. So you'll notice in these that there's triangles and hexagons, and unfortunately our little trick with the instancing doesn't apply, because to make those triangles fit, they're actually pointing in different directions, which is kind of annoying, and I had to figure out a way around it. And I'll show you a very quick breakdown of that. And then after that, I can answer a couple more questions, because I don't think I need to explain that much more. I'll have a quick look at some questions here. What viewer am I using? It's called G-Thumb. So G-Thumb image viewer. It's a Linux thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist for Windows as far as I know. But yeah. Click that away. So you see this one, it's actually a hexagonal pattern, and the start of it is pretty much the same, but you'll also notice these are multiple objects. So I'm going to start with the base shape and take away all the small ones. And here we go. There we go. There's only one in here. Interesting. So as you'll notice, I'm going to turn all of these off. Turn that one off. Turn that one off. There's another one still there. Okay. For this one, I actually started with a pattern of hexagons. So it was just a circular pattern with hexagons in it. And I ran the same script, only the first iteration of this, what I had to do is, come on, I have to turn all this stuff off every time. The first iteration of this is, before I ran the script, for the first level, I selected some randomly by hand, and I did a poke faces on it. So when you grab one of these hexagons and you do poke faces, you just get a thingy in the middle, a vertex in the middle. And after that, you'll see, once I started running the script, because there are already triangles now, and again, I want to go into edit mode to show this, the script just produces triangles. No, actually, that's not what I need. I need to turn all this stuff off. Go back out, go back into edit mode, and then turn these off. There we go. You can notice it's getting a little slower already. But then, rather than having to instance stuff, because if I want to instance this correctly, the rotation of the polygon doesn't work in this case. So what I did is I split them up by level, and I started adding a bunch of modifiers so I can control them. Now, what you will notice is all these weird edges, and that's because of the mask modifier. So rather than copying them up every time, I just use an array, because I wanted to keep everything as modular as possible. So if we turn this off and just isolate this, I'm just going to show you one of the levels. It's a got a bit more detail in it. So if I turn on the array, and actually let's turn everything off so you can see it from the start. And why are we here? It is here, something still on, the mask is still on, that's why it wasn't working. So this is the base shape after I've actually run everything else. Actually, this is the base shape after I've run the script. Then with the array on it, we just move it up, and again, same thing, you know, amount of count doubles, and then you'll see the same value. So again, using grid size or unit size 1, I could divide it by 2, by 2, by 2, and so on and so forth. Same thing with the vertex weight edit and the mask. And that just takes out a whole bunch of them. And then the first thing I did was a solidify, which I'll show you, because the first solidify is the same size as the array. They fit together nicely, so you get the same sort of idea. And I don't know why it's being so slow right now. There we go. Man, it's having a hard time. And then what I did is add in a second solidify, and that gives you that second little, second little inside one that I used for in the previous ones as well. So I'm just creating the shapes, but I'm creating them procedurally. Now then the bevel on top of that, and you'll notice the first couple of shapes will have a bevel of, what is it, 6 segments, and then 4, and then 3. And I had to really optimize this as I went down further into the levels, up to a point where you'll see these last ones don't actually have a bevel modifier on them, but they have a bevel, where is it? A bevel node on them. So you can do fake bevels and shading, because if I turn on beveling on each one of these, it just filled up all the RAM, and it got really horrible and very slow, and yeah, it just crashed Blender. So it was a case of sort of enabling whatever I needed and then taking it out. Now these lines, you'll see that's because of the solidify. Because of the mask, it sometimes just deletes vertices and leaves maybe 1 or 2 edges, but edges by themselves don't render. But then once you put a solidify on them, they'll show, and even though you can see them in the viewport, they don't render, so it's not that big a deal. And you can see as I'm turning on all these other shapes, it's basically the same thing for each one. But then this is one of the reasons I'm starting all these up in the alpha. Yeah, now I'm just making it unnecessarily slow. And that's not even the final level of detail. If I go into the shading for these, and I'm going to run through it, you'll see it's the same thing where I was using those random values to push everything around and drive the metallic and roughness randomly as well. The only difference is that, and again, Blender's locking up because it needs to save a whole bunch in the background, is that now in 2.8, you can have a random per island, which is really cool. And I'll show you exactly what that does. So again, I'm just going to grab this cube, 2.82 rather. So I don't know what I said. So before, what we were doing, just to show you the difference, GX. Let's see, we have just 5 cubes. Select all of them, add a new material. I feel like this is a bit slow, but it's okay. Add material and then link it so they all have the same materials. So where is this? So what I was doing before is in the object info node, we would grab the random. Come on, yeah, it's slow because the scene is really big. So now you'll see I'll get that same thing where it just has random colors from black to white for each one. Now, if we were to grab these, all 5 of these, and join them together, now the problem is, and this one isn't joined to everything else, because it works on object level, these all become the same color. And the way I've built this up, that wasn't going to work out. Now, in the geometry node in 2.82 right now in the alpha, you've got a random per island node. And just to get down here, we'll click a couple times. There we go. And what this does is it grabs, oh, unfortunately it doesn't work in the preview yet, but if I go to rendered, you'll see, even though the difference is very slight, if I go to edit mode and duplicate these a bunch of times, now you'll see this is all one object. It's just the one cube over here, and you'll still get that per random mesh island outside of it. So every part of the mesh that's separated from one another gets this value. And I think it was Omar Ahmad, I think was his name. He put this in, big thanks to him. And this makes it really easy to do all kinds of complex stuff now with modifiers and things where you want to be able to shade every little block that you array or whatever separately. Now you can use it with this random per island, and the possibilities are absolutely endless for what you can do within one mesh. And the main difference is not only did I need to use that to get it to work with the triangles, you'll see performance is a lot better as well, because it doesn't have to calculate a whole ton of separate objects. Sure, some stuff is still slow, like turning on the modifiers and everything, but even with this final one turned on, we're at 13 million faces, but because there are only 8 shapes with a bunch of faces in them, it's always going to be faster than having, a million objects. A million objects with 2 faces is way heavier to draw for Blender than, and you'll see some tearing here, which is interesting, but I think that might be because I'm streaming. While here we've got, 13,000 faces and what is it? 20 million verts, and because it's only 8 objects, it draws them really well. And rendering, though, it takes a little while. So I'm going to turn on the render here as well, just to show you the final result. And then I'll talk about one last little thing that I did, but just to give you an idea of how long this takes compared to the other one starts to render a lot quicker because of the instancing. This one, because it's a mesh and it has to do all those bevels and everything, and I hope I don't crash my computer, because I know this uses a lot of RAM. It takes a lot longer to start rendering. So yeah, if you have any questions, now would be the time to ask them, and I'll see if there's any more right now. So, not Blender related, but are you into modular synths? I like the idea of modular synths. I think they're cool. When I make music in my spare time, I make music on and off every now and then. I just do everything in software because I don't have the time, money, or space to get into modular synths in a big way. And it's one of those things that I think I could lose myself in. But yeah, maybe at a later state in my life, I might go back more to music, which is cool. Do I work for a studio or freelance? I work freelance. Yeah, at the moment. I've worked for studios in the past, and it was fun, but I noticed that freelance is kind of more my thing. Also, I do a lot of training and teaching, which is my jam as well. I really enjoy doing that. And as a freelancer, it's fun because you can, you can just go to. I've had studios, for example, that want to get into 3D, and they'll ask me to go teach there, and I teach them Blender, which is cool because they can start trying stuff for free. Their designers can start learning 3D, and it's fun to get people into it as well. So, any cool ideas with the weld modifier? Yeah, I'm sure Vertex, because the weld modifier supports Vertex groups, so that will allow you to do some really interesting things with smoothing, and then welding stuff together, and then smoothing to get really weird, sort of distorted shapes. I've been waiting for that one for a long time, because sometimes I've had to like collapse everything down and then weld it all together, and I kind of use 2 different objects, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. I want to be able to do everything at once. The only one I think is really missing for me to complete stuff is a cap holes modifier. I think it's called in 3ds Max. Basically something that fills all of your open edges, just caps them off and puts polygons in them. That would make so many other things usable, but I'm sure in the future it's only going to get better, especially with the nodes and everything that's coming up. It's going to be awesome. So The CPU and GPU rendering give you faster results or slower. If you have a powerful CPU and a not super powerful GPU, it's faster. In my case, if I add the CPU, generally it's slower, which is interesting because it's a fairly powerful CPU, but mainly the reason for it is, and especially with animations, is a CPU tile generally takes quite long to finish. So if you render an entire frame, you'll see the GPU tile sort of jump all over the frame and finish everything. And then the last 20 seconds of your render, you might still be just waiting on 1 or 2 CPU tiles to finish. So it has diminishing returns. I think if I were to build a rig right now with a similar budget to what I have had for this one, then I wouldn't go GPU, just because CPUs have become enormously fast nowadays. And yeah, like the latest version of the CPU that I'm using here would be close to using 3 or 4 GPUs the way I'm using, or the ones that I'm using at least, I think. And there's an even crazier one that's been announced for the future, which is nuts. And you get to use all your system RAM. The data doesn't have to be moved to your GPUs, especially for animations. You're rendering a lot quicker even than on GPU, but that's not to say there's anything wrong with it. My GPU rig is still really, really fast and fun. So you're using Ubuntu too, so cool. Hope GThumb works for you then. Then what will it take for you to do panoramic art for VR? I've messed around with VR stuff. It's fun. I've rendered a couple of stereo tests and things and fly-throughs, which are interesting because some people just instantly take it off their head and they're like, dude, what are you doing to me? Because I fly through all this stuff, which is fun. But yeah, I haven't really had much use for it. I bought an Oculus Quest recently though, so I might be getting into VR more, but I'm not gonna promise anything because I don't know where things go. I just sort of follow what I like doing. For example, I've been messing around with processing lately, which is making art through code, which is also kind of fun. And it's another way to practice my Python skills outside of Blender, which is nice. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do VR stuff. If a job comes along and people want me to do VR stuff, then I'll dive into it, and I'm sure some cool art will come out of it. Yeah. So, hey Finn, so much geometry. Yes, it is a lot of geometry, but if it works, it works. Hi Midge, each of your works is a whole world in which I'd like to get at least for a minute. Are you thinking of adding characters or maybe a short animated movie? Thanks for the stream. Well, thanks for joining first off. I've been thinking of doing a short film for a while, but it's all down to time. And honestly, I have a fair amount of work, and then my personal work on top of that takes quite some time. Actually, there is something coming up. I'll be working on the opening titles for our conference that we're organizing. So if you haven't seen me spam this on Twitter, I'll actually show you real quick. So I spoke at a conference 3 years ago now, Digital Art Conference Frankfurt. And unfortunately, the guy that was organizing it, we became friends, and I was there the year after helping out as well. I did a workshop too. He can't do it anymore because he was moving to Vienna. He wasn't going to live in Frankfurt anymore. So we're taking over and we're bringing it to Antwerp. So if you're in the neighborhood, yeah, please, our tickets are available until the end of the year. We've got the cheapest tickets, but basically it's 3 days. We've got a bunch of speakers already. I think in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be a separate video on the channel as well, just kind of announcing it. But we've got a whole bunch of people, not only from Belgium, but people from everywhere. And these are the first 11 or 12, I think 11, that are on the website, but we're going to have shit tons of 2D and 3D art. It's going to be super fun. So if you can come, be sure to grab a discounted ticket. So this is until the end of the year, and I think first month or so from next year will be our early bird, and after that it's the full price. So yeah, that's why I've been not streaming or making a lot of tutorials, because we've been organizing this. We've already got a sponsor and some other ones on the way as well. It's cool. So it's gonna be good times, but it's a lot of work. And yeah, we're a team of 4. So my brother, Robin, my best friend, or one of my best friends, Mats, and another good friend of mine, Johan, with which I've been doing CG meetups for the last, I don't know how many years now. We decided to take it to the next level and bring this to Antwerp. So that's going to be cool. Yeah. So to get back to that, yeah, animated movie. So we're going to do the opening titles ourselves this year because we did the ones for Frankfurt the last 2 years, and I'll show you the one we did last year. Go to my own YouTube channel. But yeah, organizing a conference, it's a whole new thing. It's pretty crazy. No, I'm not going to look at my own thing, but I'll look at my videos. So where's the one from last year? This is the one from 2017. And then this is the one from 2018, which I did with my brother. Unfortunately, there's no music in the recording. But yeah, so we've done a couple of animations, but this year's one is going to be really cool because we thought of the color scheme and everything. Well, kind of. It just ended up being that through some experimentation of my own. And we'll be doing the opening titles for that, me and my brother Robin and my friend Mats. And that's going to be cool. And then, what else was I going to say? But yeah, I'd love to do a short film at some point, but it's time and money, basically. I need to figure out when I have enough time, and need to be able to have enough money to kind of not work too much, so I have enough time to really get through it and make a short film. But it's been on my mind for a while. I just don't really know what the topic would be, and yeah. It'll be pretty weird, if anything, probably, but there you go. That's a really convoluted answer. So thanks, Audrey. I'm glad you're enjoying the stream. Hey, Jakub, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you too. Thanks for dropping in. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year, that's for sure. Speaking Alto says, can you not delete this live stream because I want to be able to come back? Yeah, all of my live streams I do, they just get archived instantly. So 10 minutes after the stream is done, you can go through it and play with it. So the world of 3D motion graphics, Cinema 4D seems to be the champ. Do you see upcoming improvements to Blender or ways that the software is catching up to these big names? I think catching up is the wrong way to look at it. Blender is very competent in areas whereas Cinema 4D is less competent, for example. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. But yeah, definitely everything nodes is going to be super interesting because Houdini has been getting pretty big in the motion graphics space as well. And everything nodes gives us like a Houdini light within Blender is a good way to think of it, I guess, but it's not the perfect description. But we'll be able to link a lot more different types of data together, and it'll be really quick because it'll be deeply integrated. Unlike animation nodes, which is Python based and suffers from some slowdowns and stuff if you want to go super crazy with it. But same idea, but just implemented directly in Blender, which is going to be good. I don't know, I just really like Blender. I think somebody before asked me if I messed around with Houdini. Did I see that, or did I completely miss that? That's weird. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I thought somebody had messed it, but oh yeah, have you ever tried doing similar stuff with Houdini, and what's your take on the workflow? So yeah, that was Matthias that asked me that earlier. Sorry, I missed your question. So it'll bring Houdini-like ways of working into Blender, and I think that's going to be really interesting. I'm sort of playing around with it every now and then just to get an idea of how it's going to be implemented, but yeah, it's going to be cool. It's going to be a lot of fun. So in that way, I think the future for Blender is really bright, and I don't really look at it as catching up. A lot of things that get implemented into other applications, they mature a little bit, and then Blender is able to kind of steal ideas from them and implement it in their own way. So it's fine. It works for everything I want to do, and I can always hop over to one of the other ones if I really need to. But yeah, the Houdini workflow is cool. I'm just so used to Blender to get stuff done. And the whole open source story, I'm not gonna lie, it really, yeah, the community, the fact that it's so community focused, the fact that it's open source, just really strikes a chord with my yeah, who I am, I guess, and the way I think, which is why I stick with it for the most part. So Jakob says, good luck with the conference. Thank you. We're doing our best to make it the coolest thing it can be. So will the conference be online on YouTube? At the moment, there's no plans for it yet. Because it's our first time, we really need to figure out where the best place to put our money is. And having it streamed or recorded costs quite a bit of money. And right now we prefer to put the money in our speakers, so we get really good speakers and have a really fun first edition. If we find a sponsor that's willing to help us out with recording the event, maybe it could be online. I would certainly love for it to be, but it's just a question of feasibility on our end, and I wouldn't want to promise anything that I'm not sure of. So yeah. Do I use grease pencil in my workflow? I use it for storyboarding. So for example, this is a fun little thing to end on. Actually, I want to show you one last thing. So with these renders, to sort of get them all at the same look, I ended up using Krita on the final prints. So to give you an idea, and this is going to take a while to open. Because in the Blender Compositor, it's great to do stuff like glows or do different compositing or add effects to it. But to really get the colors somewhat close to one another, and they're still not perfect. I still have a little bit of stuff I need to do if I wanted to get them perfect, but I'm happy with the way they were. What I do in Krita is just add a little bit of color correction. So generally I do this in the Blender Compositor, but just because I wanted to hit like blacks and whites exactly where I wanted them, value-wise, I ended up using Krita. And Krita has this cool feature. It's sort of like a smart effect or smart layer in Photoshop. So you can add a filter mask. And that, yeah, I'm doing it on the huge images. So these are, what is it, 7,000 by 9,000. And you can add different things in, but you can always go back and edit them. So for example, here I could add in like a weird levels adjustment and make it super dark or whatever. But you can always go back to their properties and again, give it a sec because of the size, and go back in and mess with it and adjust it and do other things with it, or bring up the black levels, for example, something like that. And that's usually I don't do this, but for once, actually, for this project, I ended up using it, which is kind of fun. So grease pencil. Let's see. For example, story v1. So here, one of the things I did is I used grease pencil to draw my storyboard. There you go. This was actually one of those ideas for a short film that I don't know if I'll ever do anything with it, but it was an idea for sequence. But we'll see. Like I said, I don't really know when it happens. But basically, what I'm able to do is I drew this with grease pencil, and let's see if we can grab an outliner here. Because I put every single shot in its own collection, what I'm then able to do is for each shot, I can then load in, and I just want, I don't want the 2D canvas, I want that 3D viewport, but let's see if I can just go in here. This is the animatic, but I want shot 1. And because then I can just instance that collection into a scene and just very quickly create a very simple looking animatic. And all within that same scene, I can then load those in. And you'll see I'll have every single different scene in here. And I just have a very basic 3D animatic. But because it's in the storyboard, if I change any of the elements here in the storyboard, then for example, let's draw something real quick, and I'm still not super fast with this stuff, so give me 1 second. So this mountain, for example, let us go into draw, and then crank up the radius. And I still have no idea how to change the colors here. Yeah, so this is me completely sucking at grease pencil. Properties, grease pencil, I'm sure there's somebody screaming at the monitor now. Where are those fills and strokes that I'm looking for? That's fine. No color. No, that's not it. Anyway, let's throw on a modifier. I know how modifiers work, so that works. So let's just tint this, for example, and tint it red. Now if I go back to that first shot, it'll actually be tinted red. So you'll see that it's set up here. And then if I go into the animatic and go back to rendering, was it compositing, rendering? Where did I have it set up? There we go, 2D animation. Now you'll see this first shot, it's actually red. So this allows you to very quickly reuse the things you drew to go from storyboard to animatic and keep it all sort of in the same realm, which is really, really nice. Material tab. So let's see if we can figure that out before shot 1. 2D full canvas, grease pencil. No, not this one. Storyboard, I mean. The material tab. There you go. You learn something new every day. Awesome. So thank you for that. But yeah, this is sort of what I do for grease pencil. So that is pretty much it, I think. Yeah, we'll see. I'm going to try and make some time in the coming months to do some more streams. The weird shit intro has gone through a million iterations because I just can't decide, but I think I'm at a point now where it might be finished, and I've got some ideas to finally restart that as well. But again, I don't want to make any promises that are too grand because of the conference. But yeah, if you've got a chance to come to the conference, that'd be awesome. I'd love to meet people from the Blender community in my hometown here in Antwerp, in Belgium. And if not, yeah, I'll see you online, I guess. But yeah, that's it for me tonight. I want to thank all of you for sticking with me. It's been an hour and 45 minutes, so people that were here from the start, thanks for going through the whole thing with me. I hope it wasn't too boring, but yeah. Enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll see you guys next time. See you later.